Hey everyone, welcome to a free tutorial from Goodly on Become a Pro at PivotTables. I'm your host and my name is Untitled Chapter. Why is this course free? Today is my birthday and I've been doing a lot of trainings for companies on data analysis, on financial modeling, and business intelligence dashboards on Excel. But I thought since it's my birthday today, it'll be kind of a good way to give back to my friends and people who read my blog and people who see my videos. So I thought, why not make a free course in pivot tables and just send it out to people? Well, that's about the course, and now let's just get started. I'll just quickly give you a glimpse of how the course is structured. Now, the course is structured in Excel 2013. Why? Because Excel 13 is a more advanced version of Excel and the most recent version of Excel, and also gives you a lot of additional features in pivot tables. So I thought I'll just take the most advanced version and make a course out of it. And this course is kind of divided into four parts. Part 1 to 3 talk about what are pivot tables and different features of pivot tables and different options available in pivot tables. And we would look at these cases on the isolated basis. So we would take up a case, talk about the case, and just move on to the next case. In the part 4, we actually make a report out of a dummy data, like a sales report. You can call that a dashboard too. We'll talk about that when we reach to part 4, and we would apply all of that we have learned in part number 1, 2, and 3 in part number 4. And apart from this, I will also kind of put in some silly jokes of mine. So let's just get started. So let's just take a look at what really is a pivot table. So I have some data with me. I'll just turn on to the data sheet, and here's the data. I'll just quickly explain you the data. We have employee codes, we have the employee name, and this employee works in which department, the date of joining of the employee, the cost to company, which is his salary, annual salary, the age of the employee, and the region that he works in. So this is the kind of data that we have. If you just take a look at the data, there could be many analysis that you could do with this data. So we have like 200 row items, so about 203 row items. I think 200 exactly, because we are starting off from the third row. So we have about 200 items here, and there could be a lot of analysis that you could be doing from this data. Analysis like, can we calculate the total CTC in regions, in different regions? So how much is the total CTC in western region, and how much is the total CTC in the eastern region, and so on and so forth. Or you could also calculate what is the average age of any particular department. So all these kind of analysis that you can do with your data can be done with pivot tables as well. But I'll just take you through the analysis, and I've just kind of hidden the analysis behind a box here. I'll just take that off, delete it. So this is the analysis. So I was talking about regions. So we have regions here, west, north, south, and east, and we have the total CTC. But as of now, this is not a pivot table. This is a formula based analysis. So what I've done is I've just used the sum if formula to calculate the total CTC in the western region, and then divided by 10 raised to the power 6 to convert that into millions, which is fine. This analysis is fine. This is done through formulas. Now all of this work could also be done with a pivot table. So essentially, pivot tables are nothing but you're performing some kind of calculations which have some criteria added to it. So criteria based calculations are nothing but pivot tables. So we have a criteria which is west, and we have a calculation which is adding the total CTC. That is nothing but your pivot table. And all of this work could be done in a pivot table too, which, if not more, would be at least 5 times faster than writing a formula. Yes, I repeat, 5 times faster than writing a formula. Now there could be a lot of things that you can do with a pivot table, and I'll talk about that in a while. But before we actually create a pivot table, I want to really take you through that what is an ideal data set that can go inside a pivot table. And there are 3 conditions for any data to be an ideal data set to work inside a pivot table. Is that your data should have proper headers. So as of now, my data has proper headers. So this is the employee code, employee name, and so on and so forth. So if I kind of delete any header, so if I take this off from this column and I delete this, now this data is not apt for pivot tables. And when we actually draw a pivot table, it's going to give us an error because we don't have proper headers in our data. The second thing that we want to have in our data is that we want to make sure that our data does not have any records empty. So although you can really have records empty if you do not have the data, but try not to have it. So let's say you may not know the region for this employee, or you may not know the department for this employee, and things like that. So okay, the third thing that we want to have positively in our ideal data set is that we want to make sure that we have empty columns around our data. So if you just take a look, this is an empty column right here. So I cannot really stick up this formula here, because then the pivot table is going to get confused that is this data also a part of this table or not. So I want to make sure that at least one column on the right is empty. You can stick up all this data on the top in column A1 as well, in cell A1 as well, but you really want to make sure that around the data, so that means these cells and at the bottom these cells are necessarily empty, right? Then your data is an ideal data set. Now after covering what our ideal data set is, we just now get started. We would now talk about that how could we get started with pivot tables, and what are the things that you have to do before you actually get started with the pivot table. As a part of the pre-work of a pivot table, I really want you to think about the end output of your pivot table analysis. So there could be many analyses that you could do actually from this data. If you just take a look at this data, I have listed down about 7 odd critical analyses that you can actually do from this data. Not that you cannot do anything more than that, but just listing down about a couple of analyses that you can do from this data. And here are those. So you can analyze any of the following. So you can analyze region-wise age or CTC. So as of now, I have done region-wise CTC analysis, and then department-wise CTC, and then you can do a region-wise and department-wise age or CTC analysis, and you can do plenty of these analyses. Now I really want you to think about that how your report is going to look like after you feed it into the pivot table. So let's just pick up one of these, and let's just try and visualize that how our report is going to look like and do some pre-work. So let's just pick up the third one, region and department wise, let's say CTC. So let's say, for example, we would want to have an analysis on the region. So we have about 4 odd regions. So I'm just going to copy those regions. So these are my regions. So along with the heading, I'll copy that and I'll paste it here. And then we have these departments. So I'd like to copy the departments, and I'd like to paste the departments here. What I've done is I've simply transposed the departments here. So just copied them, Control C to copy. And then in the home tab, I have paste special, and then I would transpose. So as of now, they are like a vertical fashion, and then they will come to the horizontal fashion. So transpose, so Control C, and I'd like to transpose home paste special, and then transpose it right here. Okay, so now it looks like this way. Now what I'd like to find out that region by region, so region by region, how is my CTC looking like? It also gets further divided into different departments. So in finance, in region west, what is the CTC, the total CTC? In international operations, the northern region, what is the CTC, and then things like that. So this is like a visualization of how my report is going to look like when I feed it up in the pivot tables. And there's a particular reason why I insist on doing this analysis before you actually draw a pivot table, and we'll talk about that when we actually make a pivot table, that why is this important and why should you be doing this. So without further ado, let's just jump right into pivot tables. Okay, I'm going to create our first pivot table. So I go and click anywhere inside the data and then go into the insert tab where the pivot table option lies, insert, and here is the pivot table. I just click on pivot table and it opens up a dialog box, and you see that it has automatically selected the range of the data. Alright, I can choose to have the pivot table in a new worksheet, or I can choose to have a pivot table in the existing worksheet. We're going to cramp up the existing worksheet a bit too much, so we would put up a pivot table in the new worksheet. Alternatively, what I generally do is I do not activate the pivot table option from the insert tab, but I generally use a shortcut, and that shortcut is Alt N V, and it opens up the pivot table box. If you're a user of Excel 2007 or Excel 2010, then your shortcut would be one keystroke extra. Your shortcut would be Alt NVT. Alt N for November, V for Victory, and T for Tango, just in case you're using any of the previous versions. So I am going to now create the pivot table. So I'm going to say in the new worksheet, and I'm going to say OK, and let's just name this as pivot 1, right? Okay. Now, when we were creating a pivot table, you saw that the range was automatically selected, and the range contained all these cells. But in the real life scenario, our analysis is more or less the same, but our data keeps on increasing. In that case, if you add one more line of data, the range that has gone inside the pivot table is not going to expand automatically. You would have to then reselect the range in the pivot table and then change the range. So let's say, for example, I'm just entering some dummy data here. So EMP, let's say employee 1, some name, I'll just put in my name, Chandeep, C-W-H-A-B-R-A, that's my last name. Let's say I'm into let's say finance. And then my date of joining is, let's say, 27th April to, and let's say 1986. That's my date of birth, but let's just make that as the date of joining. That's not a problem. So what's my CTC? Let's say $50,000. Okay, so that's okay. And then what is my age? I am 29 years old. Now I'm 29 years old. Happy birthday to me. And I live in the north, or let's say I work in the northern region. So that's my data. Let me just go back to my pivot table, and let's just go to the Analyze tab. In the Analyze tab, let's just check the source of our data. Okay, so I'm just going to click on the source here, on the source, and let's just flip over, roll over down, and let's just see that if my name is captured or not. It is not captured. So in this case, you would then have to expand your data array to the next row to capture that data as well. So these kind of problem often happens in pivot tables. When your data is expanding, then you'd have to manually go and work around with that data. So I'm just going to give you a quick fix to this. So I am quickly deleting this pivot table, and I'm also deleting this data. Okay, fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this data set into an Excel table. Okay, so I'm just going to click anywhere inside this data set, press Ctrl T to create a table. It's going to give me an option that this is the range for my table, and my table has also got headers, so this option is very well ticked. That's okay. I'm going to click on OK, and now this is converted into a table. Now one of the most awesome features of a table is that whenever you enter more data right underneath where the table is actually ending, the table actually picks that data up, right? So, and also I'm going to name the table. So as of now my table would be named by default as table 1, table 2 in the order that you created, but let me just give a meaningful name. So I'm just going to click on any cell inside the table and click on the design tab, and right now this is table 1, which I'm going to change as data. Alright, make sure you press enter after you write the name. Right. So also just be sure that you name the cells in the name box here, but if you want to name the table, you have to click on any cell inside the table, go to the design tab, which is a table specific tab that opens up when you select the table, and then specify your table name here, not here. Here is not where you get the table name. All right. So this is my table. Now let me just add the data that we just added, and let's see if our table automatically expands or not. Or let's just create a pivot table first, and let's see if our pivot table is expanding automatically or not. So again, I'm just going to create the pivot table. Alt NV, that's my shortcut. It automatically picks up the data, which is the name of my table. If you just read this, select a table or a range, table or range. So it just picked up the data table. I'm going to put it up in the new worksheet. Press OK, and I'm going to name this as pivot 1. Pivot 1. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my data and add one more line item. So let's say EMP1, and then if you see this carefully, as soon as I wrote EMP1, the range kind of expanded to the next cell, right? And then I'm just cell in finance, 27th April 1986. Sorry, what was that? This has made me too young, is it? 1986. All right, and $50,000 is what I earn. No, that's not my real income. Just saying, 29 years old and north. All right. Now let me just go back to my pivot table again, and then click on analyze, and then click on the change data source. And now let's just flip over till the end. And yes, it has captured the new record as well. So you might just want to convert all your data into tables and then feed it up in the pivot tables. All right, so let's just get moving with our pivot table. Okay, when we were working in the earlier case, we decided to analyze this third option where we made this like a pivot table pre-work, where we had the departments here, right? 6 departments, and we had the 4 regions here. This is how we wanted our report to look like, and we wanted to have all the CTCs, the total of the CTC right here. So I'm going to go in my pivot table and do the same. If you just take a look at the data, your regions are placed in rows here. Okay, regions are in rows 18, 19, 20, 21, and your department is kept in columns here, K, L, M, N, O, and P, right? So this gives me a good indication that in my pivot table, all the headers, all the department are going to be placed in the columns, right here, and then all my regions are going to be placed in the rows, right? I get that, rows and columns, and here I would have all my CTC numbers here. So I'm just going to drop the CTC here, and it automatically picks that up. Now isn't that beautiful? I mean, we didn't really have to write formulas or anything, and we have the report ready with us. Now let's just have some fun with our pivot table. So let's say, for example, I want to know more details about any particular calculation, and I want to be sure that if that calculation is right or not. What I would do is, let's say if I want to be sure about that this CTC is correct or not. So in finance, in the region of north, is this CTC, what is the CTC made of? So what I can do is I could just double click on this, and this would give me like a filtered data for finance, and in the region of north this adds up to this value. So you see that 1605300 then. So that's my total, and I'm going to flip over to the pivot table, and that's exactly what the total is, right? So if you click on any data, it shows up that how is that value made, which are the values that are coming from your data make that value. So these are the values coming from my data that are making this value, right? So if I click on this value, it's going to add another sheet and let me know that for international operations in the region of East, how is this CTC total been coming from. So I just double click here, and just like that we have international operations right here, right? And we have the region of East, and this is nothing but our total. 801,700 is our total. Let's just flip over to the pivot table. Let's just check. Yes, that is right. So double clicking on any of the values in the pivot table is just going to jump over to the pivot table and going to get the details that are there from that data. Alright, so that was our first pivot table that we just made. Now we're going to talk about a whole lot of options available to you in pivot tables for different calculations that you want to make in the pivot tables in the part 2 and the part 3 of this free pivot table course. We're going to check it out, that what options are available in pivot table tools here, right? Pivot table tools here, right here. And we are also going to talk about the different right-click options available to you, and we're going to talk about a whole lot of options available to you in pivot tables. But before we end this video, we just like to quickly revise whatever we have done. So I'm flipping over to the data sheet, and let's just see. So we started with what exactly is a pivot table. Pivot tables are nothing but calculations with criteria. Then we saw that what could be an ideal data for a pivot table, for which we looked at 3 conditions. The first condition was that our data has to have the headers. Then we saw that our pivot tables also need to have all the records filled in, not necessarily, so no line should be empty, which is not a mandate, but try and have it that way. Then the third thing was when you're trying to create a pivot table, the adjacent column has to be an empty column, and the last row has to be an empty row. The last row has to be an empty row. That is an ideal data set for a pivot table. Then the third thing that we looked at was the pre-work that you have to do before you set up to make a pivot table is that you have to visualize the output first. So because I knew this is the kind of report that I want to have, where I would like to have departments in the columns and regions in the rows, I did not do any trial and error in dropping the departments into the column and dropping the regions into the row area here instantly, and I just got that report, and the CTC went right here because that is numbers, right? So you have to visualize what kind of report do you want. You can also scribble it on the piece of paper, or you can just draw a quick thing in Excel as well, right? But just do it once, because you're going to save a lot of time not doing the trial and error if you really know that what do you want to drop in columns and what do you want to drop in the rows. Then we also learned about a cool feature called tables in Excel. Tables have this self-updating kind of nature, which if you add more data here in the last row, it automatically gets picked up, and if you add any more data here, then it automatically gets picked up by the table, right? And you do not really have to change the data source in the pivot table if your master data is getting updated. Also, we learned about how do you actually name a table. By default, your table actually gets a table name as table 1, table 2, table 3, and so on and so forth in the order that you create it. But if you want to give meaningful names to your tables, and which you should, you can just pick up any cell inside the table after you've pressed Ctrl T to create a table. Ctrl T as in tango. So you can select any cell and then go to the this design tab, right? and then give a meaningful name right here. Make sure to press enter after you've given the name, right? And do not give a table name here. This is where you give a cell a name and not a table. All right, so that was about tables. And then we actually created a first pivot table. We dropped the departments right here, we dropped the regions right here, and we dropped the CTC right in the values column, and we got this report real quick. Now in the next coming videos, we're going to look at different formatting options of the pivot table, different calculations that you can do with the pivot table. So stay tuned to part 2, and I'll see you then. Take care. Bye bye.